Today we're going to move on to the second half of our unit. This is titled Saludos y despedidas. Salutations and farewells. You can think of them as greetings and goodbyes. It's important to keep in mind your audience. Who are you talking to when you address someone? Notice this guy right here. He's a young guy, right? He says, Buenos dias is usually said before lunch. Good morning. Remember, rule number one for learning any language is we don't understand it word for word. Buenos is good, but días is days. The word for morning is different from días. Buenos días, once again, is said before lunch, and that difference differs from country to country. It's not necessarily 12 o'clock. We'll talk about that more when we study food. ¿Cómo está usted, señora Torres? The person he's talking to is older, so he treats her with respect. That word usted is formal language for you. Señora is a title. Mrs. Torres. He's asking, how are you, Mrs. Torres? She responds, I am well, Raúl. Thank you. There are several ways to answer this question. Estoy bien is just one. Let's see if we can find any others in the listening. Here's a group of friends. There's no need for formal language here. Notice the difference between the way Raúl greets Señora Torres and the way this girl greets her friend Natalia. She says, ¿Cómo estás? There's an extra S on that phrase. That's informal. How are you, Natalia? The question's the same, but the way that they address each other is different. ¿Qué tal is asking the same thing as ¿Cómo estás? But again, this is informal language. It might be the equivalent of what's up. Again, it's not word for word. Don't think of it that way. It's just an informal way as what's up is an informal way. Notice too that the way his friend says, responds to his question is much like Señora Torres responded. She said, estoy bien. He just says bien, but it's the same. Usted was formal for Señora Torres, for somebody who deserves your respect. He's addressing both of these friends, and therefore he says ustedes. Ustedes is plural. Usted is singular. This doesn't mean that he's treating them in a formal way. It just means that there are two of them. Notice the slight modification here. This friend is well, whereas this friend is really well. He's doing very good, we might say in English. Again, don't think that the word that we use in English is a direct translation for Spanish. It's okay in English to say good. Somebody asks you how you doing. I'm good. Nobody's going to get on your case about that, although it's grammatically incorrect. Bien is well. That's what we should be saying when anybody asks how you're doing. Here's a despedida. They're saying goodbye. This is not a greeting. Hasta mañana is until tomorrow. Until tomorrow. Think about other despedidas you may have already learned with hasta in there. Can you think of any? How about hasta luego? See you later. Or until later. Until then. Adios is a little bit too formal, a little bit too final. Hasta is used in several different expressions. You may remember from the Terminator back in the 90s. Hasta la vista. See you then. Here's another. If we know we're going to see each other soon, you might say hasta pronto. Until soon. See you soon. Here we have another formal relationship. Always keep your audience in mind. Here's a shortened form of señora. Written out, you'll see for Mrs. Torres is here abbreviated for Mrs. Lopez. The question's the same because she deserves her respect. Buenas tardes is good afternoon. We use that after lunch generally. And once again, that'll vary from country to country and culture to culture. Unfortunately for Señora Lopez, she's not so well. Estoy regular. I'm okay. Regular. So-so. The opposite end of bien would be mal. Regular is somewhere in the middle. Let's check out what these muchachos say. Notice he asked the question, ¿Qué hora es? And his friend looks at his watch. What does this word hora remind you of? It's a cognate. If you said hour, you'd be correct. Don't confuse it with tiempo. A lot of people think tiempo is time, and in certain contexts, it would mean time, but not in terms of the hour. To find out what hour it is, you ask, ¿Qué hora es? His friend responds, it is 1:30. Media is not 30, you know that. That's 30. Media is more like half, or the middle. It's the middle of the middle of 1 o'clock. There are several ways to divide time, and usually it's in quarters. Let's take a closer look at it. So how do we tell time in Spanish? The hour. Es la 1:05. We look back at what this friend said. Es la 1:30. We interpret that as 1:30. But look at the clock carefully. What do you notice? It's not yet 1 o'clock, and yet they start out es la una. This word menos means minus or less. So in fact, what you're doing in Spanish is starting at the next hour, which would be 1 o'clock, and you're subtracting 5. This will be frustrating, I know, but in English we do the same thing. We say 5 till the next hour. Not as common as saying 12:55, but in Spanish, this is the way we're going to approach it. Es la 1:05 is 12:55. Now, I don't think you can hear the audio in my video explanation, but the audio is wrong in your book in case you click on this. The audio actually said, es la 1:30, but clearly this is, es la 1:15. Well, that's 15, 1:15. Cuarto, again, is not the word for 15, that's quince. Cuarto is like a quarter. Cuarto, quarter, right? Quarter of an hour. Media, again, is half hour, such as this. Es la 1:30. It's 1:30. 1:30. At the quarter marks, you're not going to use the numbers. You're going to use cuarto y media. But look what happens here. Son las 2:45. Looking carefully at the clock, you can see it's not yet 2 o'clock. Again, they're subtracting. Son las 2:45 means that it's 1:45. Anytime after the half hour mark, you're going to have to subtract. It's 1:05. E means and. So literally what you're saying, it's the 1 hour and 5. It's 1:05. Es mediodía. It's midday. You might want to say Son las 12, and that's perfectly fine. Son las 12 is the same as saying es mediodía, just as it's 12 o'clock is the same as saying it's noon. Mediodía literally means middle of the day, middle day. Es mediodía. Notice this is the same hour here. Es medianoche is it's the middle of the night or midnight. Son las 12 is also appropriate. For any of these, I skipped one. Go back up to this one. At the hour mark, you wouldn't have an o'clock. Es la una is enough to say it's 1 or 1 o'clock. Now, given the time of day, you might want to use a different type of greeting. Hola is just one example. If it's in the morning, you would say Buenos días. This is used anytime from the time you get up until lunchtime. In Spain, that might not be until 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So at 2 o'clock, you would start to say Buenas tardes. Good afternoon. La tarde is in fact afternoon. And then later, you would say Buenas noches. Good night. And once again, noches is nights. Why it's plural? I don't know. I honestly don't know. But there you have it. Buenos días, good morning. Buenas tardes, good afternoon. Buenas noches. And buenas noches is not always a goodbye. We might think that good night is a way of saying goodbye. But in Spanish-speaking countries, it could also be a form of greeting to say buenas noches. ¿Cómo estás? Good evening. How are you? Here are a couple other key vocabulary words when greeting someone. To address an older gentleman, you might want to use señor. Here's an interesting fact about this word. The word señor actually means Lord. So when you address somebody as señor, you're saying Lord, as in Señor Dickerson, Lord Dickerson. Están is used to address a group of people. This person is addressing both Señor and Señora Martínez. And therefore he says, ¿Cómo están ustedes? For single people, you would use ¿Cómo está él? Él denotes a man. And ¿Cómo está ella? Ella, a woman. Mal is the opposite of bien. Él está muy bien. Ella está mal. And in between, you might put regular, but over here, for para decir más, you have a couple of other options. Así, así, or más o menos. We've covered ways to say goodbye and how to greet somebody given the time. This last word here, señorita, is only for ladies. In fact, for ladies that are not married. Guys don't have a similar denomination, unfortunately. Señorita is usually used for young girls and people that you know are not married. When in doubt, just go with señora. Under para decir más, there are also other questions that you can use to greet people. At this point, because you don't know all the varied responses for these, I would avoid them. ¿Cómo te va? How are things? Nada nuevo? Which may be true, but is usually dismissive. That's one possible response. When somebody asks you, how are things going, which is the literal translation of this, you've got a lot to say. You might have a lot going on, but you don't know how to express all of that yet. ¿Qué cuentas? What's up? What's new? What do you tell me? ¿Qué hay? ¿Qué hay de nuevo? You would have to really explain things if somebody asked you this. You should be aware of it, but it's going to be kind of hard to use it, and especially hard to faithfully respond to it.